Please help me give a warm Georgia Tech welcome to our today's speaker, Sarah Miller Caldicott. One of the most extraordinary things that I have learned about Thomas Edison is that he pioneered 6 industries in less than 35 years. There is virtually no one alive today who can claim that. So we can look at Edison for some very unique capabilities, not only capabilities of invention and innovation, but capabilities of managing people. And just take a look for a second at this list. Document duplication, telecommunications, in this case, the carbon button transmitter for transmitting sound, recorded sound, which was the phonograph and the record, electrical power, which is what we mostly know Edison for, the incandescent electric light and the entire system of distributing power. The movies. Very few people know that Thomas Edison actually invented motion pictures, the first motion picture camera, the first films, which he devised in collaboration with George Eastman at Eastman Kodak. And finally, the storage battery. All of these technologies, all of these industries exist today in some form. This, in and of itself, is extraordinary, that he created these platform concepts, things that actually led to the creation of more things, of more value, of ways that we could even be more efficient and effective in our everyday lives. So if Edison were here now, what would he be telling us? What would he be saying we need to do as we think about being effective and competitive in the digital age? Obviously, Edison didn't have access to computers. He didn't have the kind of technology that we do today. You know, things like data storage and data capacity, even plastic did not exist in Edison's lifetime. So what would he do to devise winning innovation teams now? What would he suggest to us are the skills that we need to be developing as we work through our careers? So what I'd like to do now is walk you through just some of the insights that I came upon as I was doing my research for Midnight Lunch and looking at collaboration, trying to really articulate and determine what Edison was doing so masterfully as he collaborated with his teams. I came upon what I call the 4 phases of collaboration, and you can see them listed here. The first is capacity. How do we even create the ability to collaborate in the first place? The second is context. What are the things that need to be considered as a team or a group begins collaborating? The third phase, coherence. How does the team stay together? There are lots of obstacles that can come into play. They can be financial obstacles, they might be personnel issues, team members leaving, for example. There are many things that come into play that allow teams to stay in place or not. And finally, complexity. This is something which is going to be more and more a part of your lives as you enter the workforce and as you become executives and leaders in the next decades. Complexity is going to be an everyday fact of life for you. And part of that comes because of all the data that we are seeing now, live streaming capabilities, and other virtual technologies that are changing the way business is actually conducted. Edison believed that complexity was part of collaboration. He didn't try to sidestep it. I think today sometimes we try to sort of water that part down and say, well, you know, we can put this piece in place or we can put that piece in place and that will have everything line up just the way we want. In fact, Edison organized for complexity. He organized his teams in a way that would allow them to address complexity. This is different from what we do today. We also don't always think about collaboration and teamwork as different things. Many times we actually kind of conflate the two and define them the same way. In fact, Edison believed that collaboration was really a continuum. It was a discovery-learning process in which all the members of the team contributed to each other and were aiming for the success of the entire team. In a standard teamwork situation, we have more of a time factor. I will give you my time, I will give you the knowledge that you've asked for, and then I'm going to laser out. So there are task-focused things that we all need to do that teamwork is actually very appropriate for. Not every circumstance is appropriate for a collaboration. When there's a situation that is complex, that it will be ongoing, that doesn't have a specific process or defined set of steps, then collaboration can be helpful. If it is a highly defined process, then collaboration probably would get in the way. So it's important to actually determine if collaboration is part of what you need to bring to the game or not. So let's begin with the first phase of collaboration, capacity. How do we even create that in the first place? One of the things that was a hallmark of Edison's laboratory was small teams. Some of you who have been in corporate life know that often, right from the get-go, you're working on a big team. You're working on a team of 15 people, 20 people, it could even be more. Edison believed that teams of 2 to 8 people were ideal to get things started, were ideal to begin to evaluate what are the questions that we want to be looking at, what are the resources that we have, what kinds of expertise is available to us. What Edison also did was offered windows of experience to these teams, places where they could go to have shared experiences. This is something which is really quite rare. We can look at midnight lunch itself as an actual process that Edison used to bring people together after work hours. A midnight lunch was the affectionate slang that Edison's employees gave to gatherings that started at about 7 o'clock. Edison would go home for dinner, eat with his family, and sometimes come back to the lab to check in on his experiments. He would see who else was there. He would ask the dozen or so people to exchange their notebooks and share ideas on what they were working on. They would all talk for about 2 hours and just have open dialogue. And then Edison would order food for everyone. He'd bring in sandwiches and beverages. They would all sit back, eat, sing songs, tell stories, and just relax. So in that hour or so interval, starting about 9 o'clock, they would get to know each other as people. Then, after a while, they'd get back to work and continue with their experiments and their dialogue. So midnight lunch was crucial as a means to transform employees into colleagues. When you are a colleague, you think about the people you work with in a different way. There's a different level of trust. There's a different level of engagement. Now, it's possible to be successful in an organization when you don't have collegiality. It's just harder. We see a lot of innovation failures that actually can trace back to the inability of teams to work together. So when you have the opportunity to create what we would today call employee rituals, ways that people can work together or come together in small teams, this is part of how collegiality is formed. And you can see this in many of the top 10 most innovative companies. You can see this at Intel, you can see it at Amazon, you can see it at Facebook, and in many areas of 3M. So people have the ability to talk, to share, to blend their insights together. I talked about the fact that in a collaboration, you actually need to create a context. You need to create a context for your work. Sometimes this happens right from the get-go with the workspace that you have, the workspace that you choose. But in phase 2, it's very critical to think about where are we beginning our conversations? How are we starting to think about the problem or issue at hand? One of the most extraordinary things I found about Edison's approach is that he didn't begin with solutions. Now, a moment ago I talked about the fact that he had so many ideas that he felt he could live 300 years and get through them all. Well, in fact, Edison didn't begin with solutions. He began with questions. This is another big area where in our modern management lives, in our work lives, we often begin with the notion that we have to have the answer right at the beginning. Edison was actually more interested in the questions, because what he realized was that if a team could agree on the core question they were solving, they created immediate alignment. Some of that pulling and tugging that happens later when a team is seemingly going to fall apart, go back to this. They weren't firing on the same question. They weren't looking at the same issue. So, whenever it's possible to do so, begin with questions as part of your dialogue. Don't begin with answers. Once you have a sense of what the questions are, you can begin to have deeper dialogue. You can begin to engage and really roll up your sleeves to accelerate your own learning process. So if you form a master question, you want it to be related to what you're looking at, but it isn't an existential question, like why do we have health care, or what is the value of education? Those things might be considered existential questions. The questions that Edison was asking were questions that he felt he could have some influence over or that would have some bearing on areas that he wanted to explore. One of the most extraordinary questions I saw Edison asking as he explored the incandescent electric light was, how do substances burn? Now that seems almost like a kindergarten question, doesn't it? It seems pretty basic. But in fact, what Edison realized was that no one who had been experimenting with incandescence before him, and that went on some 40 years prior to Edison's work, had asked this question. Edison realized that evenness of burning was actually the key insight in creating the incandescent electric light. How fast and how evenly did a substance burn? How was it consumed? So don't laugh at your colleagues when they come up with some basic questions as their master question or the core question. Move on from there and form hypotheses. This is where we could imagine Edison being extremely prolific. As a scientist, he was very good at the scientific method. Creating hypotheses was something very simple for Edison, easy for him. He did this very prolifically. We don't really do this very much now. In fact, we rarely experiment. A lot of times we think about experimentation taking place in a laboratory as opposed to most anywhere else. But I would urge you to remember that experiments don't have to take place in a lab. They can take place as thought experiments. They can take place even as you're conducting a survey or asking customers some questions. You can even set up online market research activity. They're called MROCs, M-R-O-C, Market Research Online Communities. You can run experiments in a week and have it all be virtual. And some of that you can Google and check into. But this is a way to actually speed the experimentation process to get information faster that's very reliable and very key. The third phase, coherence. How did Edison keep his teams together? In looking at this, I learned some very interesting things about what actually inspires us. Part of coherence in Edison's world was the inspiration. The inspiration that Edison himself brought to his teams and the way he kept them motivated as moving toward the leading edge of discovery. We look at the innovation landscape today, and we look at people like Steve Jobs or Jeff Bezos and the types of capabilities they had, the way that they inspired or currently inspire their people. And part of what we can see are these sets of qualities. A sense of collegiality, the ability to roll up their sleeves, just as I described in phase one, and work with people shoulder to shoulder. The ability to actually look out and have a vision for something big that lies on the horizon, something that you can't quite touch today. A sense of optimism that things can be done, a sense that you can actually accomplish something significant. And finally, expertise. People who are leaders and able to inspire also have an area of expertise. It is more rare that they are generalists. So think about your own world. Who inspires you? What are the qualities of that person? How could you actually become someone who inspires others? The fourth phase, complexity. I mentioned earlier that this is one of the things that many of you in the audience are going to be dealing with over the course of your entire careers. Others of us who have been in the workforce for some time are really newly coming to this question. Complexity actually is something that came on the scene in the mid-1990s, at least according to an author whom I deeply respect, a gentleman named Don Tapscott, who wrote a number of books. One of the most extraordinary, I think, is Wikinomics, How Mass Collaboration Changes Everything. And he looks in that book at when did complexity really begin to surge forward. Computer science became a phenomenon in the 1960s and 70s. IBM actually positioned itself as a core provider of the realm of data, examining what computers could do. And they're still doing that now. But what has changed is that with the internet and with the reality of Moore's law, we now have the capability of generating billions and billions of zettabytes of data. We have more data available to us than we can possibly understand or consume. And each of us in this room actually generates data every day that someone else is consuming. Our banks, our educational institutions, our retail outlets, or the places where we go grocery shopping. Lots of data is being gathered. So complexity takes two forms in the modern world. The first is detail complexity, where we're actually monitoring the facts, we're monitoring the transactions, we're monitoring how many boards of lumber there are in the lumber yard, all of that detailed information. And we're looking at dynamic complexity, which is the changeable stuff, the stuff that is actually not factual, the pieces that involve systems connecting with systems. Think about a stock market, for example, or patterns of weather in different parts of the world. These are things which represent systems that engage with each other but don't have any knowable outcomes. We're going to be dealing with dynamic complexity more and more as time goes on, and we'll need to be getting more and more comfortable with the ambiguity that goes along with that. So to summarize, as you think about your collaboration efforts, begin with small teams. Try to create a nimble structure with the group of people that you're working with. Create a sense of collegiality. Think about Edison's midnight lunch. What are some of the things that you could do to create those rituals, if you will, that bond people? Create an environment of discovery learning. This isn't about tasks and checking off tasks on the task list. It isn't about setting agendas for everything that you do. Have dialogue, engage in debate, set some of that context that I talked about. Begin with questions. Don't think about having the solution right from the get-go. Look at progress. How will you define that? What will the group begin to be able to nod their heads and say, yes, we are moving forward on this. Yes, we see that there have been gains here and maybe some misses there, but overall, we're moving ahead. Think about that inspirational quality. How can you work shoulder to shoulder with people and keep that big vision out there? Keep that way of inspiring people in front of them. And finally, the complexity piece. Remember to document what you're doing. Create your insights and share them in a way that your team can benefit from the collective intelligence that you gather. All of these capacities will allow you to be effective in collaboration now within your years at school or within the workplace and out into the future, no matter what the future brings. Thank you so much.